greenhouses. Some are functional, some are funky, and some are downright fabulous. We'll also share tips on using a greenhouse, from perfect propagation to starting strong seedlings. Greenhouse is a great way to extend the growing season. You can get an early start on your favorite plants and then keep them going through the coldest winter months. You can work on existing skills or learn new ones no matter what the weather. And visiting a greenhouse is a unique way to get to know the gardener behind it all. Meet Laura Johnson. When she's not working on her 2+ acres of lakeside property, you can find her in her greenhouse. It's 261 square feet, almost every inch of which is recycled. So Laura, what did you use to build all of this?
Well, we replaced some windows in the house, and I saved them, and then we replaced some sliding glass doors, and I saved them, and I just piled them up behind the house for about 3 years. And then my son brought me these great big 5-foot sliding glass doors, and I purchased a few windows from the junk store, and it began.
What about this sink right here?
Oh, I got that at a garage sale for $10.
What a deal. The doors and windows were pieced together and assembled on a cinder block foundation. And Laura's greenhouse is now home to a wide variety of plants and artwork hand-painted by her 7 grandchildren. So tell me what all you have growing in here.
I have a zucchini in bloom, some French green beans in bloom, some Swiss chard, some parsley, some arugula, and I have a ripe tomato.
That's great. You also have some unusual trees in here.
Yes, I do. That is my genetic engineered dwarf avocado. It's hard to say genetic anyway. And it actually gave me an avocado last year. It was the most expensive one in history, but I did get an avocado. And I have 2 Meyer lemon trees, and they're loaded with the lemons right now.
Like all good gardeners, Laura's still experimenting, seeing what works and what doesn't, trying new techniques and learning how to work with her greenhouse's unique environment. You don't seem to have a problem with pests in this greenhouse.
No, I've got a couple of resident lizards that seem to take care of them, and the white flies I take care of with insecticidal soap.
You also seem to have a lot of projects going on, both inside and out. Tell me about those.
Well, inside I'm trying to discover my different microclimates, the temperature variations in the different parts of the greenhouse, and where the sunspots are. And outside I'm digging up rocks in the yard all the time in the flower beds, and I'm mortaring them onto the outside of the greenhouse. It's been a learning experience.
Using recycled windows is certainly a low-cost way to build a greenhouse. But some greenhouses don't have glass at all. This is Brenda Beckham's hoop house. It's just an arched metal frame wrapped in clear plastic sheeting. It's simple, but one look inside tells you the results can be pretty impressive. Brenda, you have a lot of plants growing in here, so I'm very interested to hear how this greenhouse came about.
We built it, it's 30 by 12. We thought it was going to be too big, and now we think it's probably too small because I bring in cuttings from outside. I have a lemon tree and 2 olive trees that are outside now, but they come in for the winter time because they can't take the cold temperatures.
Sure. Brenda has 5 acres of property that she says she's trying to plant every inch of. Having that much space is what prompted her to build the greenhouse in the first place. Now, controlling the temperatures in a greenhouse can create a few challenges, right?
Yes, it is heated, but we have these heat mats to start seeds. It maintains a temperature of about 70 degrees.
And that works for most seeds in here?
It does.
In the summertime, it gets very hot inside a greenhouse typically, so what are you doing to keep it a bit cooler?
We have a shade cloth that lowers the temperature somewhat. We don't know how much, but does lower it.
Makes it bearable?
It does.
And then in the wintertime, when temperatures cool down, you just peel that back?
Peel it back and let the sun and the heat come in.
Okay. By the hot summer months, Brenda will be outside tending to her vegetable garden. The greenhouse will be cleaned out by May and stay that way until October. Brenda, you have a lot of plants here, so do you keep these and put them all in your own garden, or do you give some away, or what all do you do?
I plant a lot of them. because I cook and can. I'm an Athens area master gardener. I give some to our annual plant sale. We have a planter for the hungry, and I send peppers and tomatoes and eggplant for that, and they use the vegetable.
Well, I bet every plant that you give away is pretty much pest-free, because I see these yellow sticky traps are quite popular in your greenhouse.
They catch the fungus flies in the gnats. They're attracted to the white flies. They're attracted to the yellow color, but they don't catch the mosquitoes. I just wave them in the air and let the mosquitoes get stuck.
That's a good trick. For more tips on growing vegetables in a greenhouse or in your own backyard, check us out online at DIYnetwork.com. There you'll find step-by-step instructions for growing any of the vegetables we've covered on Fresh from the Garden. When we come back, we'll check out a greenhouse that breaks one of the biggest rules of greenhouses. But that doesn't seem to be slowing down the plants inside. And later, we'll show you how to reap the benefits of greenhouse gardening without a greenhouse at all. Fresh from the Garden, we're talking greenhouses. And a big issue for a gardener building one is where it's located in the yard. It needs to get the right exposure for maximum sunlight and yet be close enough to the house so it's convenient. And it doesn't hurt if it looks good too. Brincy Warner was dealing with those issues 15 years ago. So tell me about building this greenhouse.
Well, Joe's siting was a major factor. I wanted it separate from the house so that it would be a working greenhouse.
Right.
But it's close enough to the house site, all facing south, of course. But none of them seemed quite right. So we went back to our original architect for the house, and he sited it here and connected it to the house with an arbor, which we liked.
Sure, and you have a great view of the skyline.
Right, and the greenhouse did not interfere with our view of the skyline.
Right, and the only thing that I've noticed is you broke the cardinal rule of where you put a greenhouse.
That's right. The slope of the roof is facing north rather than south.
Right.
But we seem to get enough light since we're in the southern United States with it facing the way it is.
And it obviously works for you.
Yes, it does.
When you step into Brincy's 20-foot by 10-foot greenhouse, one of the first things you notice is leaves, not of the plants on the benches, but the ones hanging over your head and running up the walls. So tell me about this vine. I want to know about that.
This is called fig vine or climbing fig, and all of this grew from a 3-inch cutting that I took from a plantation cemetery in South Georgia. I took a 3-inch cutting, put it in a cup with a few cubes of ice and tucked my napkin in after it and brought it home and planted it under the greenhouse bench. And it just grows like topsy in the greenhouse with the heat and the humidity.
Right, you have to cut it back a lot?
Oh, we certainly do. It would cover the glass if we didn't.
No kidding. And you have a lot of other plants growing here. What are you growing?
More flowers than vegetables, moon vine, morning glories, hollyhocks, and then some herbs, catnip, basil, and dill, and some wheatgrass sprouts.
For what?
For making wheatgrass juice, and buckwheat and sunflower sprouts for salads.
You're really putting your greenhouse to work. When it comes time to move plants outside, Brincy has a shelving rack just outside the greenhouse door. The plants get hardened off here, gradually introducing them to living outdoors. The vegetables will end up in one of 3 beds, 42, 38, and 25 feet long, further back in the yard where there's true southern sun exposure. Brincy, you have an interesting way to water the plants in your greenhouse. Tell me about that.
Well, my husband Dick built a mist system which covers half the greenhouse. It's controlled by a mechanism called a leaf. When the water from the mister falls on the leaf or the screen, it weights the screen down and turns the mister off. And when the water evaporates from the leaf, the mister comes back on.
So the leaf actually detects the amount of water on the plant. There's not a physical switch that you have to turn on and off, so there's really no way to overwater your plants. Is that right?
That's correct.
And there are a number of ways to control temperature in a greenhouse. What do you do in your house?
We have a gas heater and with a thermostat, which comes on at 55 degrees. And for cooling, we have a ventilating fan, which also has a thermostat, which can be set between 80 and 85 degrees.
So the plants are always in a temperature range of 55 to 80 and 85 degrees.
Right.
Let's go check it out.
Sure.
As is the case with most greenhouse owners, there's always something new in here that Brincey's never worked with before. Brincey, you have a lot of foxglove growing here. What's going on?
Well, I'm attempting to force these to bloom in time for my niece's wedding, which will take place on the lawn in front of the greenhouse in a couple of weeks.
So by forcing these, you're using the temperature in the greenhouse to get these to bloom when you want to, right?
That's correct.
Now, do you do a lot of experimenting in your greenhouse?
Well, when the greenhouse was new, I did a lot of stem cuttings and root cuttings and leaf cuttings, such as these hens and chicks that were originally my grandmother's. But now about all the time I have to spend in the greenhouse is just to start seeds for annuals and vegetables.
Although it's great to take a break from the rest of the world when you garden, one of the nicer features Brincey added to her greenhouse was an intercom system, which is especially nice if your greenhouse sits off by itself away from the house. It's an easy way to stay in touch. When we come back, we'll roll up our sleeves and get to work. We'll share some tried and true greenhouse gardening techniques.
Life
In the garden, I'm Joe Lample. Today we're talking greenhouses. So far we've seen 3 different greenhouses, each with a unique style, but all are success stories. Maybe you've been inspired to start your own greenhouse or just perfect existing skills. I've got a few ideas that you can put to work yourself. Propagating or reproducing plants from seed is a great way to use a greenhouse. It can take weeks for a seed to really get going, but you may not want to use up your valuable space in your garden beds waiting for that to happen. Using a bench inside your greenhouse to propagate plants frees up the bed for other things in those first few weeks, and it puts the tender seedlings at a convenient and comfortable working height so you can more easily keep an eye on them. The first thing you need to start your seeds is something to plant them in. Now, almost any container will work for that as long as it has good drainage. Like this tray here already has holes punched into it. And many gardeners like to use trays like this because they're inexpensive and they're readily available. Brincey here has lots of them lying around. And she even has a container dedicated to extra cell packs. Now, Brincey, I have a question for you. If I want to start multiple varieties in one tray, I know I can buy a tray like this that has those dividers already built into it, but you have your own technique for that.
Yes, my husband cut plexiglass strips which fit lengthwise into the tray, and I can adjust the width of the rows this way, and it makes it much easier to prick out because it separates the roots.
Right.
And here's a tray already started.
For plants that you know won't transplant well, like dill, you can use peat pots. When it's time to transplant, you can plant the pot right in the bed along with the seedling, and the pot will break down on its own in the soil. Besides soil and water, some seeds need some extra help in order to germinate. Seeds with tough outer hulls, like this moonflower, need to be scarified first, and that means simply to nick the surface so that moisture can get inside to help start the germination process. It helps to soak the seeds in water to soften up the hull. Then take a fingernail file and carefully break through the outer layer on the tip of the seed. If you don't have a file, you can also use a small piece of sandpaper and have the same result. Once the seeds start to take off, they eventually need to be transplanted to a larger container or planted out in the garden. And there's a way to know when that time comes. Right, Brincey?
That's correct. The first leaves to develop are the seed leaves. They don't look anything like the true leaves of the plant. If all you see are the seed leaves, then it's too early to transplant.
And the seed leaves can actually turn yellow and fall off, but that has no bearing on the overall health of the plant.
No, you want to wait until you have the first set of true leaves. Then you can transplant.
To transplant the seedlings into bigger containers, use a plastic knife to dig right next to the seedling to remove it. Pull the seedling up and hold onto it by the leaf. Holding it by the stem can cause damage that's tough for the plant to overcome. Make a small hole in the new soil, either a pot or a bed, and firm up the soil around the stem. Make sure the plant stands upright and is just at the same depth in the soil that it was during germination. Finally, mist it with some water to get it off to a good start in its new home. You'll want to pay close attention to your growing medium when working with seedlings. When you start your seeds, use a germination mix. It's really light, but it holds moisture very well. But when you transplant your seedlings to a larger container, use a potting mix. It has the same ingredients but with added pine bark, and that's good for drainage. But you'll use a lot of this, so have plenty on hand, like Brincy here, who has 2 containers full, so it's always readily available. For many plants, it just isn't practical to start them from seed. It's often quicker and easier to take a small cutting. And using the controlled environment of a greenhouse, you can get an exact genetic duplicate of many of your favorite plants, like Brincy's fig vine. It started from just a 3-inch cutting. Start by picking out a plant to take cuttings from. Choose a healthy plant, because if it's diseased or has pest problems, you'll just duplicate those problems with cuttings. Then find a 3 to 5-inch tip to cut, as long as it's not absolutely new growth. You want to remove any flower buds or blooms from the plant, as well as any leaves along the lower portion of the stem. Brincy, you also like to do something else.
Yes, I like to cut about 2/3 of the foliage off to prevent as much water loss as possible. I also like to make a scraping cut along the stem.
And that gets the cutting ready for the rooting hormone. Rooting hormone is a man-made powder that's based on natural plant substances and includes a fungicide to keep the cut portion of the stem from rotting. Mix up a fresh container of 2 parts sand or perlite to 1 part peat moss. Give the cuttings a quick dip in the rooting hormone, then plant it in the mixture. Growing a plant from a cutting can take weeks or even months before it's ready for transplanting. But after a few weeks, you can give a gentle tug, and if it feels anchored, well, that's a good sign it's ready for transplanting. When we come back, we'll share an inexpensive way to get started in greenhouse gardening without the greenhouse. On today's Homegrown Hint, I'll show you an easy way to get into greenhouse gardening, and you won't even need a greenhouse. Greenhouses operate on 2 main principles: heat and light. The light, you can buy that at a store, and the heat, well, you already have it. Typically, greenhouses are kept between 80 and 60 degrees. That's basically the same as your house. So your home is already a prime candidate for an indoor greenhouse. An unused corner of a basement or a garage will work just fine, as long as it's heated. Just about any garage or basement is warm enough to start plants indoors, but it's the sunlight that's usually most scarce. That's where these come in. Sold at just about any home improvement store or nursery, these fluorescent lights are designed to mimic the sunlight, and they come in 2 styles, this tube style and then a floodlight. And as long as you have access to indoor power like this, your indoor greenhouse can mimic the sunlight. Your propagation bench can be just about anything: a workbench, adjustable shelves, even a freestanding shelving unit. As long as you have enough lights to cover each shelf and enough electrical power to run 2 inches above the 2 inches is right. On a clamp style light, it works well because as the plant grows, then you can just move the light up, assuming you have something for it to clamp onto. On a shop style light, a chain works well because as the plant grows, you can just move the hook up and then reposition it on the chain. To make sure the soil stays at the optimum temperature, you can also place your seedling trays on grow mats. They plug into an electrical outlet and automatically maintain a temperature of about 70 degrees. Some even have a thermostat so you can control the heat generated. Now all that's left to do is keep up with the watering and move these plants outside when the time is right. If you'd like more information on gardening, then check out our website at DIYnetwork.com. There you can find information on greenhouses as well as lots of other step-by-step projects. Thanks for watching Fresh from the Garden, and I'll see you back here next time.